Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 19th of Feb 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Far Cry 3 update adds master difficulty level. A plan to resurrect the classic monolith FPS Blood has been tripped over at the first hurdle by Atari. Final Fantasy X HD announced for the PlayStation Vita, and Sony cuts the PlayStation Vita price by 20% in Japan. Yeah, it's a little bit of a slow news day, could you tell? Well, this is about the best that I could find. Of course, the calm before the storm, since the Sony announcement is coming on the 20th, so I expect things are going to start rolling very soon after that. But until that time, we will make do with what we've got. So, new features and changes to Far Cry 3 have been announced by Ubisoft, and these include, perhaps most importantly, the so-called Master Difficulty setting, which can be unlocked if you have beaten the game on any difficulty, and is supposedly the next level of challenge, according to Ubisoft. An all-new Master Difficulty with more aggressive wildlife, as well as tougher pirates and more deadly privateers. Your skills as a master of the Rook Islands will be tested, so they claim. Interestingly enough as well, they also decided it would be a good idea to subtitle it Worse Than Malaria, which is a nice little peck at their previous game, Far Cry 2, which indeed had malaria in it, and it was terrible. So we'll see how that turns out. It's good that they've put this in, certainly. They have also put in the ability to reset outposts, which means that if you've taken out all the outposts, you can reset them, and that means, I suppose, you get the chance to take them over once again, which I suppose would be okay. I mean, this is not something that I'm really bothered by, but I think a lot of people just like the open world nature of the Far Cry 3 game, and they dislike the notion that it becomes less dangerous because of actions that they have taken. So that's a nice change to put in. Just bear in mind that when you do it, all incomplete side missions and quests will become hidden. In order to finish the incomplete side missions, you will have to retake the outposts once again. So just be careful when you decide to press that button. There's also a bunch of multiplayer features, not something that I'm really all that interested in. I mean, I dipped into the multiplayer a little bit. I didn't really find anything too interesting there aside from the ability to create maps. And there is certainly the possibility that that will really take off. But one way or the other, I think the most important part of this feature is the fact that they have upped the difficulty. This was one of the biggest complaints that I had. The question, I suppose, is going to be as to whether or not Master Difficulty also restricts your resources in such a way that you genuinely have to scavenge and play a little bit of survival game. One of the biggest problems I had with Far Cry is that a couple of hours into the game, you can basically be John Rambo, have a flamethrower, an assault rifle, and an explosive longbow, and you become this one-man army, which actually was not what I was looking for. I was looking for more of a stalker-like experience, where you have pretty run-down, poor equipment, you're scavenging for bullets, and taking on the pirates requires a little bit of planning, a little bit of stealth and subterfuge, some trickery. Unfortunately, in that game, especially on its default difficulty levels, even on hard, you can pretty much just run at them and gun them down, and it's actually not remotely difficult at all. So maybe Master will fix that, but of course we don't know yet. This is in a forthcoming update, and it will remain to be seen as to whether or not it is the true Far Cry 3 experience. The problem with tweaking difficulty levels is that it can go one of two ways. Either you do it right and you make resources more scarce and you make the enemies smarter, or you do it wrong and you turn them into bullet sponges, which is no fun whatsoever, or you give them something ridiculous like infinite grenades or whatever. It's a bad idea. And unfortunately, an awful lot of game difficulty levels do exactly that. It's pretty much what Borderlands does in a nutshell, and there's quite a few different examples. I mean, any of the Bethesda games, for God's sake, Skyrim and Oblivion are really bad when you turn the difficulty level up. Oh, just hit it some more. It's like, no, that's no fun. You've got to make the enemies smarter. You've got to make resources more scarce. You've got to change the nature of the game itself. And I know that takes a lot more work, but it also makes it better. So it depends, I suppose, what kind of perception you want from your community. Do you want people to believe that you genuinely care about the game, and you want to encourage people to either buy the DLC, which there's actually a curious lack of up to this point. I'm hoping that they're going to put some really nice story-based DLC, add a new island or something. I know they did the High Tides DLC pack plus the Deluxe Bundle, which is basically just the stuff that was in the Deluxe Edition anyway. But there's not a lot of DLC available for this game up to this point. Or just you want to encourage people to buy the next game in the series or buy the next game that you make. And Far Cry 3 made a lot of friends within the gaming scene because it's a really good game. So here's hoping that they manage to nail this master difficulty level down. That would give me a really good reason to go back to the game and try it once again. Sad news for those looking forward to the potential resurrection of the Blood franchise, that being the FPS from Monolith, released in 1997, which did get a sequel, which sucked, I might add. Good lord. Blood 2 The Chosen, nowhere near as good. Absolutely not. Jace Hawley, former CEO of Monolith, wanted to bring back Blood in a similar way to how new engines have been created for Doom. And he, unfortunately, has run into a bit of a snag, the fact that Atari currently holds the rights, and they said in a very simple one-line email to him, we just don't want to do this. They had absolutely no interest at the moment. They are declining to proceed, which is unfortunate. There's not really much else he can do because Atari still holds the rights to this game, so they are unable to try to remake it in any form without Atari's blessing. Jace Hall does have a copy of the source code, so he could do it without their permission, but it would be a very, very bad idea, especially since Atari has a rather litigious history. He said that he would not release it without approval, and it looks like there isn't going to be any approval anytime soon. So he's continuing to wait and hopefully trying to convince them of it. Blood was an interesting game. I played a little bit of it a long time ago. I mean, this was around the time when stuff like Duke Nukem 3D was coming out, stuff like Shadow Warrior was coming out, Rise of the Triad, something of a golden era for FPS, and Blood was an interesting one, mostly because your default weapon was a pitchfork, which I very much liked the notion of, and it had some interesting design. It was a little bit Cthulhu-esque, very cultist stuff going on in that game, and of course it lived up to its name. It was very messy indeed. The sequel, on the other hand, not so good. You can actually pick up Blood and play it on GOG, and I would recommend that you do that. The main problem is, of course, it's a pretty ancient-looking game. Yeah, you're going to be playing it in DOSBox. It's not necessarily as enjoyable as it would have been back in the day, and it would have been kind of nice to see an HD version of this, but it looks like Atari isn't budging on that, so you know, if you need another reason to dislike Atari, then there you go. You can add that to the pile. But we won't be seeing a new Blood or remade Blood game anytime soon, I am afraid. Final Fantasy X HD has been announced for the PlayStation Vita, or I should say re-announced, because it was like 2 years ago when this thing was originally announced, and it was confirmed a little bit later on that there would be a Vita version. So they're re-announcing the announcement. I don't know. But whatever the case, we now know for a fact that Final Fantasy X HD is coming to the Vita, which presumably is not in HD because the Vita screen is not actually technically an HD resolution. That screen is 960 by 544. Don't get me wrong, I mean, it's a very nice looking screen, but one way or the other, that's not actually even 720p. The game is also coming to PlayStation 3 and will feature some of the stuff that was missing from the international release, including the Dark Aeons and a couple of other little features. There has not been any indication that there will be a lot of substantial new content, but one way or the other, the game is coming in your general direction. Well, that's another game for the PlayStation Vita, which is nice. I mean, God, Vita owners have been scrambling for stuff like that. Unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of games right now, which is a shame, because in my opinion, the Vita is probably one of the best handhelds ever made. It's just a beautiful system. It's so well designed, and it has a lot of power, a serious amount of power behind it. You can play stuff like Mortal Kombat, you can play stuff like Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom, and it looks and sounds and plays great, and it's really, really fast and responsive. So it is sad that we're not getting a lot of support for the actual console itself, and hopefully things will be done about that. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next segment. I want to just talk about Final Fantasy X for a second. Final Fantasy X I did play a lot of, surprisingly. I didn't beat it because I was actually playing it in the store. You want a little story? Okay. So I used to work at Game. It was a crappy retail job. Everyone has to do them. You got to pay your dues. And I ended up in a store that was down in basically the basement section of a Debenhams. And nobody came there, yeah? Nobody. So a lot of the time I'd get all the daily jobs done out of the way, and then I'd just kind of sit there because we had a PlayStation 2, and I started playing Final Fantasy X, and I got a hell of a lot of the way through that game, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It wasn't too bad. Some of the story was pretty cringeworthy, as was some of the voice acting, but the cutscenes were still impressive at that time. I mean, they're still impressive now, honestly. And the storyline was pretty decent. I enjoyed the battle system, even though it was somewhat simplistic. I was totally taken in by the sphere grid until, of course, I read on the internet that it's really nowhere near as customizable as you think it is. But it wasn't a bad game. It definitely wasn't one of the worst Final Fantasy titles. It wasn't as linear as Final Fantasy XIII, although pretty damn close. And it had some fun stuff like Blitzball. Blitzball was awesome. Fantastic minigame. So I might play that again, maybe. I don't know if I've really got the time. I think that it seems like there's so many other great JRPGs that I could play. I still have barely scratched the surface of Ni no Kuni. I'm still waiting to tackle Xenoblade and the last story on Wii. There's a lot of stuff to do. And I don't know if I really want to revisit Final Fantasy X. Honestly, that doesn't seem like something I'd be that interested in doing. I mean, hell, I should just beat Final Fantasy 13 too, because that wasn't actually that bad. 13 was horribly linear. 13-2 was a lot better. I played, what, 6 hours of that on a live stream at one point. You know what? I actually had a decent amount of fun with it, so it seems like that might be a good idea. It's obviously nice that we're getting more games for the PlayStation Vita, even if they're PlayStation 2 titles from like 10 years ago, but it is hard to complain. But let's try and complain anyway, right? On the eve of the announcement from Sony as to what we're going to be seeing, hopefully, from the PlayStation 4, we can talk about the PlayStation Vita. Sony has decided to slash the price of the PS Vita by about 20% in Japan. What they've done is they have taken the price of both the Wi-Fi and the 3G versions down to about 19,980 yen, which is around $215. So that's a pretty big price cut for the 3G, not so much for the basic Wi-Fi model. Sony spokesman was unable to comment on the international prices or any future plans in terms of a price drop for the PS Vita. So they really would love this to do better in Japan. Can't really blame them, considering so far the only game they've really brought out over there that actually spurred on PS Vita sales was Persona 4 Golden. It seems like they're banking on Soul Sacrifice as well, which is a forthcoming action RPG for that particular system, since they're releasing a red version of the Vita, a Soul Sacrifice Premium Edition Vita, and they're obviously banking on that hopefully selling a few more units. Japan is very much a killer app orientated market. They're pretty willing to pick up systems based on a really good RPG. So you often see these big sales spikes when a new Dragon Quest game comes out for a system, a new Monster Hunter game comes out for a system, or something, of course, like Persona. But here's the big problem I've got with the PlayStation Vita, right? The problem with it is that it's a premium piece of hardware that honestly doesn't have a huge amount of games really going for it, unless you desperately want to delve into the PSP back catalog, which is not the worst idea in the world. It's a good back catalog. It's a very good back catalog. It's got a lot going for it. However, unless you want to do that, you don't really have a lot of choice on that system for really good games. You've got Gravity Rush, which is pretty good. You've got versions of games you probably already played on other consoles, like Mortal Kombat, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom, as well as Street Fighter X Tekken. You've also got a couple of racing games, like Need for Speed Most Wanted. But once again, these are all pretty much equal or inferior versions of titles that are already out on other systems and were out months before. As regards to original software on that system that's really worth playing, there's not a lot of it. And that is a real problem. So that's the first thing they need to fix. And also, the problem is you buy this system and then you've got to spend more on proprietary memory cards for it, which are actually exceedingly expensive, like unrealistically expensive. A 32 gig Vita memory card, bearing in mind that they really want you to store media on this thing, to download games, which can often be several gigabyte in size to this thing, is $87. That's pretty high. You want to know how much an SD card costs? A SanDisk 32 gig SD card costs $20. $20. Are you kidding me? You can get the Extreme version, which is much faster. That's a Class 10 for $33. So if you're claiming that the write speed on a Class 4 is too slow, well, just pay $30 and get a Class 10. There is no excuse. There really isn't. They just said, oh, we're just going to make a proprietary memory card. We're not even going to use the memory stick anymore. Because, you know, screw the guys that bought memory sticks. We want them to buy all new hardware again. And that's exactly what they did. And that adds a huge amount of extra cost to the actual system. Thankfully, there are a lot of retailers that are now bundling 4 gig memory cards. If you're buying a Vita now, the best bundle to get is actually the Call of Duty one. There's a lot of shops that still have this. Call of Duty sucks for that system. It's like the worst game on the system, so just throw it out or sell it to some sucker. But you do get a 4 gig memory card with it, which is not that big, but at least it lets you play games. The problem is some of these games you can't even play without a memory card because the bloody thing has no internal storage. Why? Who the hell knows? You know, it's once again an anti-consumer kind of decision that was made there. And compare that to the 3DS. That takes standard SD cards. The Wii takes standard SD cards. You don't need to buy any silly proprietary nonsense. And this is unfortunate because really, Sony were doing pretty well with the PS3 in regards to not having proprietary nonsense. Like, you could charge the controllers with a standard USB cable, you can plug normal keyboards into it. That system accepts a lot of different joypads that the 360 doesn't, because it doesn't require that kind of certification. And this is what they do with the Vita. And you wonder why people are put off it. Small software library, expensive machine. I really think they just have to eat it when it comes to price, because it would be a real shame to see the Vita fail. It is a beautiful system. Like, you look at that system and it's like someone put a serious amount of effort into designing this thing. It's really nice ergonomically. It's got dual stick control, which is of course absolutely phenomenal. And even little details like the buttons, the actual PlayStation symbols are sunk into the buttons themselves. They clear, nice premium and transparent plastic. It is a nice machine. The rear touchpad, it's got a lot of tech behind it. It's got a huge amount of power. It can display some seriously impressive visuals. It is a good machine. I love my Vita, but I have barely any reason to play it. Basically, once I beat Persona 4, I put my Vita down and I haven't touched it again. Hey, I'm playing my 3DS now because of Fire Emblem. And I'm just waiting for a good game to come out for the Vita so that I can actually enjoy it. I hope Sony doesn't screw this up. They've got to do something about it. Maybe they have to slash prices. Maybe they have to take that loss, because in the long term it's better for them. The problem is they've been taking losses over and over again, and it's starting to get just a little bit concerning. So I hope that they can pull the Vita out of the hole that it's currently in, and then they can convince developers to actually make good games for it, because there is the catch-22. It's the same with the Wii U right now. You can't get people to buy the system because there aren't enough good games. You can't get people to make good games for it because not enough people bought the system. Sad, is it not? Alright folks, there you go. Thank you very much for watching. That was the content batch for today. My name has been TotalBiscuit, and I will see you next time.